Genesis chapter 38. At that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and made love to her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. Shelah. It was at Kizib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death. Judah then Judah said to Onan, "Sleep with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the child would not be his, so whenever he slept with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from providing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, so the Lord put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, "Live as a widow in your father's household until my son Shelah grows up," for he thought he may die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's household. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. When Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep, and his friend Hira the Adullamite went with him. When Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and then sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which is on the road of Timnah, for she saw that though had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, she went over to her by the roadside and said, "Come now, let me sleep with you." "And what will you give me to sleep with you?" she asked. "I'll send you a young goat from my flock," he said. "Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it?" she asked. He said, "What pledge should I give you?" "Your seal and its cord and the staff in your hand," she answered. So he gave them to her and slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she after she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the man who lived there, "Where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road at Enaim?" "There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here," they said. So he went back to Judah and said, "I didn't find her. Besides, the man who lived there said, 'There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here.'" Then Judah said, "Let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughing stock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result she is now pregnant." Judah said, "Bring her out and have her burned to death." As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law, "I am pregnant by the man who owns these." she said, and she added, "See if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are." Judah recognized them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Sheila." And he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand. So the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So this is how you have broken out." And he was named Perez. Then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was named Zerah. The word of the Lord, Genesis chapter 38. So, another interesting story in this chapter, chapter 38 of Genesis. So, we see here, I just noticed one verse here that says about Onan. So Onan is a son of Judah to um, to a known wife. I think it was not mentioned, but Onan was, I think, the third son of Judah, and Tamar was his sister-in-law, since that Tamar was the wife of but what happened was, he is the second son, then Onan. So was the firstborn, but was put to death by the Lord because he was evil in the sight of the Lord, wicked. And so Onan is obliged to sleep with Tamar, with his sister-in-law, since that during this time it was their culture um, to give offspring, or to sleep with the widows of their brothers, especially if there's no son, or there's no children. So what Onan did, instead of sleeping, or they did sleep, but I mean they mated or made love, but what happened was, Onan withdrew semen, his semen, to the ground to keep providing offspring to his brother. So in his mind, even though he will um, he will be able to make Tamar pregnant, it will not be his son. It will not be his children, because it's gonna be the children of his brother So there's some kind of misconception, and right now we are not practicing this, but the during those times it was right in the eyes of the Lord, because it was their culture to really multiply. So Onan uh, was dead. He died also. It says here in verse 10, what he did was wicked in the Lord's sight. So the Lord put him to death also. And yeah, it was really unusual for us to read this kind of um, a story, because we no longer practice this in our time, right? So it's like, you know um, sexual immorality to sleep with your sister-in-law. But again, during those time it was allowed, not just by the people, but the Lord really, allowed those. We don't know the reason, but it was allowed. So, um, In the other verses as well, it was mentioned that Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah, slept with her and pretended to be a prostitute. So we can see here their kind of culture was really different from what we are right now. But what we can maybe get out of this story is the the lesson to do the right thing in the eyes of the Lord. So there was like a mistake there in the end of Judah to sleep with a prostitute. Of course, during that time as well, it was like a sin or not allowed to, sleep with a prostitute, but it was rampant during that time. Even those old days, prostitute was already there, available. So he slept with a prostitute instead of getting a wife for himself. That's why he was able to sleep with his daughter-in-law, which who conceived a son for him, or sons, twin. They were Perez and Zerah. The reason why these this story is important in the Bible, because I think something, or someone will be born out of Perez and Zerah. They were important characters in the Bible, and we will find it out in the next chapters. And if you're a filmmaker, we can really make something out of it, like a movie. It's like a movie. And what is important in this um, story is that we are reading how God relate himself to his people, Israel. So again, the Lord is not a faraway God. He is near. He relate to us. He care for us, whatever our situation is, even small things. Everything in our life relates to God. So we should not separate God from our daily life. This is the truth, and these stories in the Bible tells us that in everything we do, the Lord is there. He's watching over us and caring for us. So I hope I was able to share something to you in this video, and encourage you to read the Bible also. God bless.